Okay, welcome everyone. You are attending the virtual meetup lesson for social studies on September 10th. I hope you guys have had a good day so far. If you weren't able to join our virtual meetup, I'm glad you're here. And if you were, I'm glad you're able to look back and just fill yourself in on maybe some of the things you missed during our virtual meetup. So we're going to start off with a welcoming ritual. I want you to name a store you think you could not live without. Okay, so I want you to think of that store, get that store in your head, and then say why this store is important to you. So take just a minute and think about that, and then pause the video and tell someone around you. Great, well, I am going to show you guys a store that I think I could not live without, and I'm not proud of this. But the store that I think I could not live without is Walmart, because it is so convenient. Anytime that I need something, I know that Walmart will be open and it'll probably have it. So, not the most exciting store. And again, like I said, not proud of it, but Walmart is that store for me. Okay, so we're going to talk about today's I can statements. By the end of the lesson today, these are the things that we should know how to do, okay? So number 1, I can provide the names of industries in Tennessee that started after the Civil War. And number 2, I can explain why these industries were important to the Reconstruction of Tennessee. Okay? Okay, so we are going to go ahead and go straight into the lesson today. So what I want you to do is, as I read, I want you to follow along. And any time I come to an industry, okay, and an industry is kind of like we talked about in the beginning of stores, right? Stores that you couldn't live without, except an industry is kind of more broad than that. So, for example, maybe your store that you couldn't live without was Nike, okay? Nike is a clothing and shoe company, okay? It's mostly a clothing industry, a part of the clothing industry, okay? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about industries. I want you to be paying close attention to the industries mentioned and also the inventions that were created, okay? So what you need to do is you need to get a paper and pencil if you don't have one right now. So you can go pause this video and find a paper and pencil. Okay, and now that you're back, we are going to keep on moving forward. I want you to write down anytime we come to an industry, and I want you to write down one thing that's important about that industry. Or anytime we come to an invention, write down the invention and then why the invention was important. Okay, here we go. Between about 1760 and 1840, the North and Great Britain were experiencing the Industrial Revolution, while the South remained a farming economy. Factories drove the Northern economy. In 1870, the South experienced the Second Industrial Revolution, which lasted 50 years. During this time, companies began using more and more machines. Companies grew bigger. Some had thousands of employees. Companies divided jobs among workers, which sped up production. Cities grew too. In 1900, Memphis had over 100,000 people. Nashville had about 80,000. Knoxville and Chattanooga had around 30,000 each. About 25 million immigrants came to the U.S. between 1870 and 1916. And we're going to stop right there. Just to refresh your brain, an immigrant is someone who comes from outside of a country to live within the country, okay? So they're not from the country, but they come to live in the country. That's an immigrant. Immigrants were a source of labor in plants and factories. So they worked in the factories, okay? The total U.S. population grew from 40 million to about 100 million. The growth of the railroads sped the growth of other industries. Trains could take raw materials across the country more quickly than ever before. By 1900, there were over 200,000 miles of railroad. These also supplied grocery stores in town with coffee, flour, cornmeal, sugar, and other goods. People went to towns to buy these items. Trains also allowed Tennessee to begin exporting lumber from its forests. Iron ore and coal were also important exports. All right, so you should have written down an industry, okay, from that last paragraph that we read, and why that industry was important. Banks grew too. Banks gave loans to businesses. Successful companies sold stocks and bonds, which allowed others to make money from their successes. The sales of stocks and bonds gave companies more money to use to invest in newer machines and more workers. Farming changed during the Industrial Revolution too. Plantations and large farms no longer had slaves. For the first time, Southerners had to pay for workers. With the end of slavery, many slaves became sharecroppers. They rented farmland from owners. They got to live on the farm and pay the owner with the crops they grew. Okay, so we got to talk a little bit about sharecroppers the other day. So I want you to think about what you know about sharecroppers, okay? And get that in your head. I'm going to recap what we know about sharecroppers. So sharecroppers, like this paragraph says, they partnered with the owners of the farm and got to live on the farm because a lot of them didn't have houses because they had just gotten out of slavery. So they got to have a house, a very small house, and they got to pay for where they lived with the crops that they helped grow. But guys, they were not paid fairly, okay? So even though it says that they are sharecroppers and they're sharing the money that's made from these crops, they really didn't share it much. Most of the money went to the owners of the farm. So it was still pretty unfair. So we're going to keep going. It says, during this time, more people came to believe that everyone should be treated equally. The Reconstruction Amendments were passed after the Civil War. These amendments outlawed slavery, allowed all men to vote, and protected everyone equally under the law. And realize it says it allowed all men to vote, so no matter the color of their skin, they were allowed to vote. However, women were still not allowed to vote at this time, okay? That wouldn't be till later. And then after everyone became allowed to vote, they actually took back some of that law and only they let people of color or men of color vote, not women, but men of color vote, except their vote only counted for 3/5 of a regular vote. Okay, so there's still a lot of unfair thoughts that are going on at this time, and so we need to recognize that too. But in the very beginning, they let them vote for a full vote, and then they decided to take it back. Okay. There were also several inventions that helped industries grow during the Industrial Revolution. Many new machines made work easier. 4 of the most important were the cotton gin, the railroad, the telephone, and the gas engine car. 3 of these are still in use today. Okay, so I'm going to skip over the part about the cotton gin because we have a video on that and I want you to watch the video that I post. It also says the development of railroad changed transportation. The first trains were used in the 1830s. They were powered by steam. During the Civil War, trains moved troops and supplies. 2 rail companies Central Pacific, and Union Pacific worked to build tracks across the country. In 1869, tracks joined Sacramento to western Iowa. Okay? And then Samuel Morse invented the telegraph, which let users send messages using a special code. The telegraph was invented in the 1830s and 40s. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in the 1870s. This allowed people to talk to each other over long distances. So, you're also going to watch the video that I post about Alexander Graham Bell, and you're going to learn a little bit more about his invention of the telephone. And last but not least, the development of the gas engine car also changed transportation. In 1880s, Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler developed the gas-powered engine. Carl Benz produced the first car that ran on gas. So that was Carl Benz. But the person that we really recognize in our history is Henry Ford, because he used an assembly line to make the production of cars more affordable so people could actually buy them. Because at first, no one could buy cars, okay? They were so expensive. And only if you were very, very wealthy could you buy a car. But Henry Ford figured out how to create an assembly line where people at the factory worked on one thing all day and then they'd pass it down. So I think that you've probably seen an assembly line before, whether it was maybe seeing a video of a factory or visiting a factory, or maybe you were creating something and you were in charge of one piece of the project and then you handed it to someone else who was in charge of another piece, and so on and so forth. And you kept doing that over and over and over again until all of the things were created. Okay? So his car was called the Model T. That's what he called his car. Okay? So hopefully now you have seen a few inventions, okay? You know of a few inventions during the Civil War, or right after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period. These were very important to the South and also Tennessee, but a lot of these were important all over, right? The North definitely used railroads and the telephone. The South, however, really needed the cotton gin, okay? So we are going to end today with our optimistic closure, and make sure that you go and watch the video on the cotton gin and the video on the telephone. So here's our optimistic closure, and I want you to choose one of these to answer. Either name an industry that started in Tennessee after the Civil War. And that doesn't mean it needed to start in Tennessee first, just means that it was in Tennessee after the Civil War. Or, why was industry important to Tennessee's Reconstruction? So why were the industries that were here important to Tennessee's Reconstruction? All right, I hope you guys have a great day, and make sure to check out the assignment that's been posted in your social studies, okay? You're going to have a writing exit ticket. It's only going to ask you to answer about 3 questions. Make sure you answer all 3 questions with complete sentences, okay? I've been seeing a lot of sentences that are not complete. That means you need to start with a capital letter and end with a period. Okay? All right, guys. I will see you very soon. Hopefully, if I didn't get to see you today, I get to see you tomorrow because it's Friday. All right. Bye, guys. I'll see you soon.